We are joined by the man that Wisconsin has to send back to the Senate, Senator Ron Johnson. And Senator Johnson, appreciate you joining us. You just teed off on the Biden administration policies and how they've weakened the U.S. and emboldened the adversaries. Let me play this for you, and then I'll bring you in.
It's in those early days of the Biden administration when he canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, opened up our borders, started pushing for out-of-control deficit spending, which has sparked 7.5% inflation, a 40-year high. All these policy decisions have weakened America. It's emboldened our enemies. It's basically tempted tyrants to take advantage of the situation. So you have now a situation where tyrants are on the rise, and we're trying to react. What this administration has done is virtually across the board enact policies that have weakened this country.
Senator Johnson, I want to start with this, the breaking news that I'm sure you've seen. The Biden administration is extending the mask mandate for federal travel, for airplanes, for buses, for trains, all these things. You guys just had the State of the Union. Nobody wore masks. Masks, mercifully, are finally disappearing because they don't work. How moronic is it for them to be extending the mask mandate on airplane and air travel?
Very moronic. Yeah, I was in that Commerce Committee hearing when the airline heads not only said that they didn't make sense, but they talked about the science. They've done extensive studies of an air cabin with HEPA filters in airline cabins. It's probably one of the cleanest breaths of air you're going to take. So, it's completely ridiculous. But I think what it really shows is that the people who have pushed all this on America will never admit they're wrong. And this is one of the ways they, I guess, confirmed that they weren't wrong. They continue it, even though it's completely moronic.
Senator, it's Buck. I got to say, when do you think they're actually going to stop with all that madness? Is it going to go away, or could you foresee them saying, just to be on the safe side, as if that makes any sense, they'll keep this going all the way up perhaps to the midterm election?
Yeah, again, I think it's, part of the reaction is this helps confirm the fact in their minds, and hopefully for the public in their minds, that they were never wrong, that they've been right all along. And they just need to do this just to make it that much safer. What is really a tragedy about how they've responded to COVID as it relates to masks is, I don't care how good an N95 mask might work if you change out 3 or 4 times a day, tight fitting on an adult. I'll tell you where it would never work is on a child. Have you seen children wear masks? This was obvious from the start that masks would never work on children. No matter how effective they might be on an adult or a healthcare worker, they would never work on children. And yet we made our children do this for 2 years, delay speech, denied them the ability to read the expression on their teacher's face, to smile, their classmates. I mean, the harm we have caused our children, we've plunged them into a state of fear with immature minds. I mean, what we have done to our children is a travesty, which is one of the reasons the people who have foisted this on us, the COVID cartels, the COVID gods, they can't afford to be proven wrong. And I've said this in the past. They have the power because they are the legacy media. They are the big tech social media giants. They are, the big pharma and everybody else. They've got the power to make it very difficult that they can be proven wrong. I mean, let's face it, you guys are outliers. You're talk radio. I wish every American listened to you, but they don't. They listen to the legacy media. That's where a lot of people get the news, and we still have a lot of our fellow citizens in this state of fear that they whipped up, and they've been very effective at maintaining the state of fear.
Well, we appreciate all the people listening in the state of Wisconsin, including Milwaukee, where we're #1 right now, and they need to make sure they get out and work to ensure that you get reelected because you're speaking the truth, and so many people are spreading lies. Speaking of lies, 7.9% inflation rate now, Senator, and the Biden administration is shifting all the blame now, and they're saying, hey, the reason this is occurring is because of Vladimir Putin. What do you think of the shifting blames as to why we are at a 40-year high for inflation?
Well, it's total BS, but it's expected. It's obviously not true. We had gasoline prices up over $1 before Putin ever invaded Ukraine. This is the result of their war on fossil fuel. He canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. Gee, do you think that's going to reduce the price of energy? This is the result of their policies. This is their policy goal. They have a war on fossil fuel. You know, you listen to the clips, the video clips of Joe Biden during the campaign. He was absolutely dedicated to ending the use of fossil fuels. So when you have an economy dependent on fossil fuel, you restrict the ability for people to produce fossil fuel. What do you think is going to happen to the price? And you just mentioned the 7.9% inflation rate. That's accelerating. It's not going away because the price of energy flows through every product. And it's, to a certain extent, the product price is a lagging indicator. The cost of housing went up over the last 12 months. The rents are just being changed now. That's going to spark additional inflation. So this isn't going away anytime soon. Of course, then just a massive deficit spending. The Democrats still are proposing, and here's how much the press is in the tank for the Democrats. They're pretty well parroting what Biden says. Yeah, you know, the solution to inflation, build back better. Let's do some more deficit spending. This is beyond absurd, beyond moronic.
We're speaking to Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Senator, how concerned are you that this Biden administration could get dragged further into the Ukraine conflict than is wise, and we could find ourselves in an open conflict with Russia? It seems like the no-fly zone idea has gotten pushed back from this White House, but people are still concerned. How worried are you that they're going to mishandle this, or what do you think happens here?
Well, unfortunately, I agree with President Obama's Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who said that Joe Biden was wrong on every major foreign policy issue for the last 40 years, and his record remains unbroken. He's surrounding himself with the exact same advisors who were advising him probably those 40 years as well. So, no, I've got a great deal of concern. He obviously didn't respond appropriately to try and prevent Putin from invading Ukraine. That would have been a successful response. It's pretty galling. The State of the Union is basically taking a victory lap. Hey, look at the coalition of people that are now supporting Ukraine once it's been invaded. No, our European allies are just waking up to the fact that Russia is that much closer to their doorstep, and all of a sudden they're reevaluating their policies as it relates to their own defense. So you only have to look at what he's doing, crawling to Iran. You realize the U.S. is not negotiating directly with Iran. They refuse to meet with us. We're actually having Russia and China negotiate on our behalf. So do you think that's maybe perceived as weakness by Russia? You think maybe that's one of the many factors that played into Putin's calculation? He said, yeah, this might be a good time to invade Ukraine because America and the West are weak.
Senator Johnson, what do you expect to happen with the Build Back Better? I know that it's been tabled because of Joe Manchin, but you made an important point there that there are arguments still being trotted out that by using parts of the Build Back Better agenda, they could try and reduce inflation, which is total nonsense. But do you think that there is likely to still be a big domestic spending bill rolling out between now and election season? Or do you think the Democrats are going to end up acknowledging that they really can't get much more done? Where are we based on your analysis of Senate movement?
Well, here's my concern is they don't want to be perceived as failing. They all want to spend money. And they all want to increase Americans' taxes. And so I'm concerned that they just might find in their own minds a sweet spot where they can raise people's taxes enough to allow for just enough spending, call it deficit neutral, and go ahead and pass something like that. So I'm highly concerned about that. But, you know, one thing I do want all of your listeners to understand that inflation is the Democrat tax on the middle class, on the working middle class.
No doubt.
As much as Joe Biden said he wasn't going to increase taxes on anybody, no, this is the Democrats' tax on the middle class, on every American.
Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Senator, thanks so much for coming by Clay and Buck Show. Appreciate it.
Can I mention my website, ronjohnsonforsenate.com? I'm going to need a lot of help. I've already been outspent $13 million to $2 million, so ronjohnsonforsenate.com. I'd truly appreciate the help.
There we go. Absolutely. Thanks, Senator.
Got to get those votes in for him. That's going to be, that's a major battleground election in Wisconsin. People have to win that, have to win it for him.
We've got our friend Bill Roggio joining us now. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. editor of the Long War Journal and a U.S. Army veteran. Bill, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
What do we need to know about the fighting right now in Ukraine? How is this conflict playing out right now?
Yeah, look, I think the common narrative that we're hearing is the Russians have stalled, they're bogged down, they're demoralized. But I always say the map doesn't lie. When you look at the map of the Russian advances from day one, they've taken significant territory, and they're prepared to surround Kiev, the capital. They're in the process of encircling Ukrainian troops in the north, in the east, and in the south. In the south, they're close to fully taking control of the strategic Black Sea territory. This is where Ukraine uses to export its food and other exports. So, and they're advancing. It looks like they're prepared to encircle Kiev and then link up from the south to the north. It's a long process. This doesn't happen in days. This is a military operation that is unfolding. And so the Ukrainians are in danger of losing half their country. They're in danger of being encircled locally, again, in areas it's already happened in areas in the east and in the south, but it's in danger of losing literally half of its country if the units that are in and around Kiev can link up with the units in the south, and I'm seeing that develop on the map. It's a question of whether can the Russians hold this. That's a separate question. But what I'm seeing in that is the Ukrainians, who are fighting valiantly and harder than anyone, including the Russians, had thought, but they're still losing this war.
What's the time frame here, Bill? I mean, you talked about what the Russian strategy is and that it's taking longer than they may have anticipated. Obviously, we're still in the middle of bitter winter cold in Ukraine. As it starts to warm up, as spring arrives, what do you anticipate this battle looking like going forward based on what you've seen so far?
Yeah, there's a lot of known unknowns here. And one, if the capital capitulates, if the Zelensky government flees, this can wrap up in the course of weeks. I think I'm looking at timelines of a couple of months here. They're always difficult to project out into the future. There's a lot of factors. Do the Russians lose heart? Are there logistic issues? Are they unable to overcome logistical issues and supply, and other issues? We have to remember it took the U.S. military 42 days to conquer Iraq. It took them 3 weeks to enter Baghdad. I don't understand why we expect, I see a lot of reporting, the common narratives. The Russians didn't take Kiev in 2 days and therefore they failed. But what I saw them do is launch a planned operation, and they're plotting through in the Russian manner. It's not pretty, but it is moving forward. So I put, again, it just depends on how long Kiev could hold out, if the area around it is encircled. But I think if things continue as is, we're talking months before the Russians could take full control or at least encircle the eastern half of Ukraine. And that I would draw a line south from Kiev all the way to just about Odessa, a little area a little bit west. That's a significant area is over half the size of Texas.
Bill Roggio with us now, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, editor of the Long War Journal. Bill, what could really turn the tide here? I mean, what are the possibilities? You mentioned the Russians logistically collapse, or they lose heart, there's some change, palace coup. That's all on the Russian side. What are the ways that the Ukrainian side could actually shift the momentum here to not just slow down, but stall and even reverse the Russian progress?
The only thing I think that would reverse the Russian progress, and I do not advocate for this to be clear, would be intervention from NATO. The Ukrainian forces are being ground down. They have not conducted any significant counterattacks in order to halt the Russian advance. All they can do is conduct a fighting retreat and hold on to cities. Now, what they can do is try and make a play to get the Russians to quit the fight if they burn them out. If the Russians, again, that's back to the Russian side of the equation. The Ukrainians can make those things, make it so painful for the Russians that they either stop the offensive, halt their advance and keep what they have, or they, or actually retreat from the country. I don't see that as being highly likely. It would take some type of outside intervention in order for the Ukrainians to be able to turn the tide and look to eject the Russians from the country.
Bill, what's the impact if the Ukrainians got access to some of these airplanes, these fighter jets that have been much discussed as to how they might get into Ukraine? But we've certainly seen that Russia has air superiority, and by and large, the Russian advance has sometimes been very, very jumbled in terms of you felt like you could just fly over and drop a lot of bombs right on those guys as they are very closely packed and not in any kind of fear of aerial assault. What would the impact be if suddenly Ukraine had access to jets?
Yeah, so it's not just having the fighter planes; it's being able to maintain them. Where are they going to be based? Are there pilots? Do they have enough pilots to fly them? Do they have enough people to maintain them? I mean, I think they could put a hurting on the Russian forces. It can blunt or slow down the advance. But unless they're going to receive an air force that is hundreds upon hundreds of planes, and they can base them and coordinate and regain air, or at least some type of air parity at the very least, and be able to launch sorties against those Russian forces that are amassed, I think the impact would be on the margins, frankly.
Bill Roggio, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and the Long War Journal, where he is the editor. Bill, appreciate your perspective today, sir. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great. Have a great day.
Thank you. We are joined now by Senator Ted Cruz of the great state of Texas, where Buck and I were just down almost in your backyard, Senator. We had a huge event in Houston, #1 in the market there, and we had an awesome time. And I understand you're in D.C. right now with people who are continuing to protest, the truckers, against all these ridiculous COVID restrictions. And I want to start with this question because I'm sure you saw it, Senator. How ridiculous is it that the Biden administration has extended for another month the requirement that people have to wear masks in airplanes, on plane flights, on trains, on all different sorts of transportation across the country?
It's completely asinine. It makes no sense whatsoever, and it continues the COVID theater we've seen from Biden and this administration. I'll suggest a real simple rule. How about we follow the same mask policy that members of Congress followed at Biden's State of the Union address last week? Out of 535 members of Congress, I don't think there were 5 wearing masks in the entire chamber. It ought to be up to you. If you want to wear a mask, knock yourself out, wear a mask for the rest of your life. That's fine. But we are beyond the point where it makes any sense at all to be mandating masks, and we need to end these mask mandates. They're wrong, and a long time ago I filed legislation to end these government mask mandates.
Senator Cruz, it's Buck. You know, the inflation number that came out today, 7.9%. We're basically at 8% inflation. 4-decade high inflation number. This is obviously something that's going to hurt a lot of folks who are just trying to pay bills, get through their day-to-day. And based on the commentary from the Biden White House, it seems like they're not learning any of the lessons of the mistakes they've made. Instead, they're going to double down. So is it your expectation that inflation is just going to get worse throughout this year, and we might even be headed into a recession under the Biden presidency?
I think there is a real risk of that. I'm concerned that we are headed towards stagflation that we had under Jimmy Carter in the 1970s. And, you look at a lot of young people, a lot of people in their 20s and 30s have never lived where inflation was a real factor in life. And it is cruel. It hits people. It is effectively a tax increase on everybody, but especially seniors, especially people on fixed incomes. It is a viciously cruel tax because everything you do, whether it's paying your rent or paying your mortgage or filling up your car with gas or buying food or heating or cooling your home, all of them are much, much more expensive. And Biden is doubling down on the same policies. In fact, I think they've cynically decided their new strategy is blame everything on Putin. So they're claiming now that all of this inflation, that the massive increase in gasoline prices, they say, is 100% because of Putin. And that's just a flat-out lie. We had galloping inflation long before Putin invaded Ukraine, and it's a result with gas in particular of the Biden administration's assault on domestic energy production, which is driving up the cost of gasoline.
Senator Cruz, you represent Texas, which is the forefront of oil and gas all over the nation. And I'm sure as a result, you talk to a lot of oil and gas executives. What do they tell you we should be doing right now in order to maximize domestic oil and gas production? What should we be doing based on what you're hearing from your constituent companies and your constituents?
We should get back to the policies that we know work. And the policies that were in place just over a year ago under the Trump administration. You know, in 2019, America became energy independent. We were the number one producer of oil, the number one producer of natural gas in the world. We were a net energy exporter. We were producing more oil and gas than we consumed. Last year in 2021, under Joe Biden, we lost that status. We're now a net energy importer. And the reason is simple. Biden, when he came in, literally the first day in office, he shut down the Keystone Pipeline. That destroyed 11,000 high-paying jobs. It destroyed 8,000 union jobs with a stroke of a pen. At the same time, he also, on that first day, froze all new leases on federal lands, both onshore leases and offshore leases. That had a profound effect. On top of that, he also halted development of ANWR, a very small section of Alaska that has massive petroleum reserves. He shut it down and said, we don't want those petroleum reserves. We don't want more oil. We don't want more gas. Well, you know, if you shut down, and the result of all of this is the rig count plummeted dramatically. We began drilling much less, and this was their stated intention. It's what Biden told the radical left he wanted to do if he was president, and it's what he's done. The answer, we should step up and be producing here at home. And by the way, one of the first places to start is the Biden administration has 6 different applications pending to export liquid natural gas. The State of the Union address, I pulled aside Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State. I told him, if Biden really wants to do something to stick it to Putin, he ought to today approve all 6 of those applications. We ought to be exporting the oil and gas we're developing, and we ought to be drilling more and producing more. That's how you drive down gasoline prices.
Speaking of Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, Senator, war in Ukraine is getting more destructive, more violent, and the Russians seem to be gaining ground slowly, but gaining it nonetheless. There was some discussion about MiGs being transferred to U.S. custody to then be transferred to Ukrainians to fight. What do you view as the proper role of the U.S. in all this, and what do you think should be done differently than what we've seen so far from the White House?
Well, we should be doing a lot differently. And let me start by pointing out this war didn't have to happen. This war is the cause of serious mistakes from Joe Biden. 2 mistakes in particular caused this war. Number one, the disastrous withdrawal and retreat from Afghanistan that caused every enemy of America to look to Washington to take the measure of the man in the Oval Office and to conclude that Joe Biden was weak and feckless and ineffective. And at the time, I said the odds of Russia invading Ukraine have increased tenfold, and the odds of China invading Taiwan have increased tenfold. But secondly, very specific mistakes Joe Biden made with respect to Russia and Ukraine. You know, Putin didn't wake up yesterday and decide he wanted to invade Ukraine. He's wanted to invade Ukraine for decades. He wants to reassemble the old Soviet Union. And in fact, he did invade Ukraine in 2014. He marched Russian soldiers into Crimea, the southern part of Ukraine. But why didn't he invade the rest of the country? And the answer is that Russia's major source of revenue is selling oil and gas, and the natural gas pipelines run right through the middle of Ukraine. And if he invaded Ukraine, he risked damaging or destroying those pipelines, which would make it impossible to get his gas to Europe. Well, the next year, Putin began building a pipeline called Nord Stream 2. It's an undersea pipeline that goes directly from Russia to Germany, and it skips Ukraine. And the reason Putin began building Nord Stream 2 was so he could invade Ukraine. In 2019, I authored sanctions legislation to shut down Nord Stream 2. My legislation passed Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support. Passed the Senate, passed the House. Donald Trump signed it into law. Putin stopped building Nord Stream 2 literally the day that President Trump signed my sanctions legislation into law. For over a year, the pipeline was dead. For over a year, Putin did not invade Ukraine. Then Joe Biden becomes president on January 20th, 2021. 4 days later, Putin resumes building Nord Stream 2 with deep sea construction. He did it because Biden was weak, and just a few months later, Biden formally waived the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, giving in to Russia and Putin. He allowed him to build the pipeline. That is why Putin invaded Ukraine. You know, this last weekend, I had a video conference call with President Zelensky in Ukraine. He told me and the other 99 senators, he said, if Biden had imposed sanctions on Nord Stream 2, Russia would not have invaded Ukraine. So the Biden White House's weakness caused this war. And you asked what they should do differently. We should be doing two things: providing lethal military weapons to Ukraine to let the Ukrainians defend themselves, not American soldiers, the Ukrainians to defend their own homeland. And number two, using energy offensively to take away the ability of Putin to fund his war machine. We ought to be exporting oil and natural gas to Europe, taking away his customers. If you take away his revenue, you take away Putin's ability to wage war.
One more for you, Senator Cruz. A no-fly zone. Do you support this, or do you think this is a bad idea?
I think it's a terrible idea. A no-fly zone would be an enormous mistake. Why is that? Because you'd be putting American pilots in the air in a combat situation with Russian pilots. And the last thing anyone should want to see is a shooting war between America and Russia. That is a bad, bad idea. What we should do, and you mentioned these MiGs. So when we talked to President Zelensky, what he said he needed more than anything else is he needed fighter jets. And he said he needed fighter jets because the Russians have superiority in the air. And a natural place to turn to is Poland, which has a number of MiGs, old Soviet MiGs, from when they were all behind the Iron Curtain. And the Ukrainian pilots are trained on the MiGs, so they know how to fly them. Poland was happy to send the MiGs to Ukraine to let the Ukrainians use them. They wanted the Biden administration to commit to helping them backfill and making F-16s available so that Poland was not left defenseless. The Biden administration didn't want to do that. And so they started playing political games. And what the Biden administration said is, well, it's up to Poland whether or not to send the MiGs. We have no view on it. It's up to Poland. Poland's a sovereign country. They can decide whether or not to send the MiGs. And what Biden was doing was blaming Poland for not sending the MiGs. Well, Poland, day before yesterday, called Biden's bluff and just flew the MiGs to a U.S. Air Force base. So now the Biden administration has the MiGs. And within hours, the Biden Defense Department said, nope, we're not giving the MiGs to the Ukrainians. That was it. What happened was Poland called Biden's bluff. I think we ought to give those MiGs to the Ukrainians. We ought to have the Ukrainians should come in, and Ukrainian pilots should fly those MiGs out. And if the Ukrainian pilots, if they engage in combat with the Russians, they're at war with them. They can engage in combat, but we ought to be helping provide the weapons to enable them to fight to defend their nation.
Senator Ted Cruz, we appreciate the time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, gentlemen. God bless.
Thank you.
That is Ted Cruz.
We are now joined by the Surgeon General of the state of Florida, Dr. Joseph Ladapo. Doctor, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
So Florida, this was the story just a couple of days ago, will be the first state to officially recommend against the COVID-19 vaccines for healthy children. Dr. Ladapo, tell us why, how you came to this conclusion, and what you've seen in response from the medical community.
Yeah, this is one that all of our grandmothers can understand. I mean, it's very simple. We're faced in reaction has been, basically tantrums and people just kind of unhappy with what we said, but not putting much thought into the reasons why we said it. I mean, it's very simple. You have we have a country where most healthy children have already had COVID-19. They have immunity. There's no data that says that these kids benefit from the vaccines. So you have a population that's already low risk. They're stupendously low risk if they've already had COVID-19. So you're basically committing them to risk with no evidence of benefit. And for what? For what reason? Because everyone's got to get the shot? No thanks. That's not how you make good decisions. You think about, the people that your decisions affect.
Dr. Ladapo, this is Clay Travis. Appreciate you joining us and the work that you're doing as Surgeon General down in Florida. So I've got a 14-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. I looked at all the data. I think they probably have had COVID since my wife and I have both had it. But the data doesn't reflect that they should get it based on what I have done, my own research, and based on the doctors that I've talked to. I believe you have children as well. One of the reasons why I like to not only get the opinion of officials in their official capacity, you're also a parent. I'm assuming you're making the same choice for your kids as you would be advising other people. I think that's significant because a lot of people don't trust you unless you say, hey, I've got kids too, and I'm telling them to do the same thing, because there is an innate understanding that every parent out there is looking out for their kids the best. So I'm curious,
Right.
I believe you have young kids as well. What are you doing with those kids, and how would you consider this not only as a doctor but also as a parent?
Oh yeah, well, hey, we're in a similar club. Your kids are a little older. I've got 3 wonderful boys, 8, 5, and 3 years old. For all the money in the world, I would never give them one of these vaccines. I mean, I think it's just silly. I mean, I'm sure they've had it. My kids have been out and about since the beginning of the pandemic in the spring of 2020, and while limited benefit or no benefit, basically unknown benefit is one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the risk. And people like to pretend like we know everything there is to know. That's a flat lie. We will continue to learn things about the safety of these vaccines just as we have over the past several months. And, unfortunately, so many scientists and doctors are pretending that what's happening really is that they've decided their position, and their position is that every kid should get this. And then they just sort of pick and choose which data points they want to use to support that. And it's completely ridiculous. So all the money in the world, I would never give some new product to my kids, particularly when they're incredibly low risk and almost certainly wouldn't benefit.
Well, I appreciate you telling us that. And I'm curious, I know that you were at UCLA when all of this began. I believe so, based on what I've been reading. And that the way that California was shutting down was very frustrating to you and your wife in terms of having those 3 young boys and wanting them to be able to be out and about running around. They got a lot of energy, as anybody who's had 3 young kids knows. What has your experience been, not only as a doctor, but just as a parent, moving from California to now live in Florida?
Oh, it's been fantastic. We had the school shut down in LA, and so we had our kids home. We did the best we could with the remote learning, which was, really it hurt the poor kids the most. So it hurt the black kids and kids who were Hispanic, and they did it willfully. They kept the schools shut. We did the best we could for our kids. When the next school year started and they said, okay, the kids can come back, but we're going to test you, twice a week and force you to wear masks, my wife and I were like, not in this universe. So we didn't re-enroll them. And, fortunately, we were just starting with kind of a homeschool with some like-minded parents. And fortunately, that's when I got the call from the governor's office. So it's been great here. They go to school, they have fun, they get to be kids. They're not worried about something they don't need to be worried about, and they're happy, friends, sports. How kids should be, not this ridiculous, sort of prison system school, testing, mask, and stay away from other kids that some people in the country are trying to normalize.
We're speaking to Dr. Joseph Ladapo, the Surgeon General of the state of Florida. Dr. Ladapo, You guys did not have a mask mandate in schools over the last year or so, or certainly this past school year, I should say. What can you tell us in terms of the data on this? Because this is still, I just saw another study, I think it was yesterday, that's in preprint, that's claiming that masks reduce cases something like 75%. Then when you actually look at the study, it didn't reduce cases, but they said it based on modeling reduced secondary cases, which how they get that? Well, it's a computer model. You can't question it. What data do you have to answer the question definitively whether mask mandates in schools are an effective protective measure or not?
Well, basically, there's none. So, in terms of the highest quality evidence we have about mask use, you look at the randomized clinical trials, and even the ones that have been done during the pandemic. And basically, they either find no benefit or a very small benefit. And none of the randomized clinical trials that have been done during the pandemic have found any benefit, zero, nothing, in young people. So it's really a belief system in terms of the mask mandates in schools. And I'll tell you, one of the studies that the CDC touted as supporting it basically was taken down by the Atlantic, which is a left-leaning outlet. Just so many holes in the study, so many data errors, methodological errors, statements that were essentially false in the study, poor control groups. It really is sort of this, I don't know, it's like this crusade, and it's just not founded in data.
We're talking to Dr. Joseph Ladapo. He's the Surgeon General of the state of Florida. I'm curious medically, not your just opinion as a logical human being, but medically. State of the Union address, Joe Biden and virtually every member of Congress, senator, congressman, almost none of them are wearing masks. And yet the Biden administration came out yesterday and told us we have at least 30 more days of needing to wear masks on airplanes and in airports. Is there any medical basis at all to explain why it's safe for everyone to not have masks at the State of the Union, but it's unsafe for us to be not wearing masks on airplanes?
Well, let's just say you can add it to the long list of things that make no sense, but public health leaders and political leaders have insisted needed to be done. Whether it's like you sit down and you eat, you can take your mask off, but you walk to the restaurant, the bathroom in the restaurant, you put it back on. It's just a lot of nonsense, and a lot of Americans, I think, have woken up to that. And I hope everyone does. It's just been a complete sham. These measures that have been taken without really any substantial basis in evidence. And people have had 2 years, roll out the good evidence if you've got it. If not, please stop advocating for these burdensome policies.
Dr. Ladapo, do you have a lot of physicians that you know personally or just, through the professional world that come to you and say, I've kind of known all along that this Fauciite madness was anti-scientific crap, but I was too scared to say anything. I thought they'd come after my license. Are you coming across a lot of doctors who are saying now, I was wrong, I should have agreed with you? I'm just wondering, like, within the medical community, some of us have been wondering why there are so few doctors who are willing to speak out about what is so plainly obvious now and has been for a long time.
Yeah, it's a good old cancellation theater. Docs, if you're not independently wealthy, you depend on your medical practice to provide an income from your family. Well, when CNN and NBC and CBS and the dean of your, medical school and whatever other health leaders are saying, like, you got to wear the mask and you got to do this and you got to do that, even when the evidence doesn't support it, people want to be able to put food on the table, pay for the mortgage, and avoid the being called mean names by journalists. So, I think that's the main reason. For me, it was not enough. So many things were so wrong, and the stakes were so high. And I go back to the kids and these lockdowns and keeping them out of school. I mean, that's going to reverberate for decades. And we knew that was no mystery. I mean, what do you expect? That's what happens when you cut children off from a critical part of their development and their safety and their security. So I think, the cancellation theater has been quite powerful in silencing doctors who know that the things that we're doing don't make sense.
It's interesting, Dr. Ladapo, and we appreciate the time you're giving us. We know how busy you are. You laughed when I asked the question about the State of the Union, nobody wears masks, and then bringing it back for airplanes. It is so ridiculous, I think, to the vast majority of people who are listening to us right now, millions of people all over the country. But how do we end the mask mandate, right? Because Buck and mine's concern, and I'm sure this is something you worry about too, is even the places that are dialing back use of masks now are saying that they're able to do it, but they could bring them back. Remember, they took them away from us and said you don't have to wear masks in May of last year. And then they brought them back throughout the rest of the summer and the fall. How do we end this once and for all?
That's the thing that's on my mind. I think that's something that's on Governor DeSantis' mind also. And my hope is that we can provide enough education to people so that they just stop participating in these silly games. It's completely ridiculous. It's ludicrous. If we don't participate, there's nothing that can be done. And that's what should happen because the evidence just isn't there.
Dr. Joseph Ladapo, Surgeon General for the state of Florida. Sir, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
We are joined now by the man who has been instrumental in bringing forward data, facts, and truth for 2 years now, Alex Berenson, author of Pandemia. Please subscribe to his Substack. I am a subscriber. Clay's a subscriber. We recommend you do the same. Alex, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
What are the most important things people need to hear right now about the situation of COVID, the data? I mean, there's so much we can dive into, but Alex, honestly, I just want to give you the floor. What do people need to know about what's happening right now?
Well, I mean, I think you said it. I mean, we've talked about this for a while, and it looks like it is even more true than it was a couple weeks ago or a month ago. We're in a better place in terms of the pandemic itself, in terms of infections, and the spring is coming, and it's likely we're going to see a continued seasonal fall. But in terms of the politics, I think it's really important to understand that the people who did this, the people who forced lockdowns and who forced masks and who forced school closings, some of them just want this to go away, right? The politicians on the Democratic side probably just want this to go away. But the public health establishment has not conceded defeat. And they want to sort of set policies in place so that when the next pandemic comes, or when COVID comes back, and I do believe, as I said to you before, that it's likely to come back, that the rules that they established in the last couple of years will come back too. And so we need to fight on a couple of levels. Those of us who are on, what I call team reality and have called from the beginning. One, we need to make sure that the truth about what happened over the last couple of years comes out, starting with the lab leak, and the likelihood that that's the real source of this, and going on to the fact that, lockdowns failed completely to make any difference to the course of the epidemic, and talking about vaccines, which is probably the most controversial issue, but one where I will say, and, have said and will continue to say that, it doesn't look like vaccines did very much good at all if you look at the overall course of the pandemic the last couple of years. It certainly doesn't look like they should have been mandated.
Can I ask, Alex, what is the latest on, because the last thing that they were really holding on to was, even into, let's say, mid-January, it was, well, if you get the shot, you're not going to die, and if you didn't get the shot, COVID will kill you, was essentially the binary they set up. Do we have a better sense of, okay, it was somewhat effective at lowering mortality, but at what level?
So really good question, really complicated. In the UK, and I wrote a Substack about this week, 90+% of the people who die in the United Kingdom now are fully vaccinated, meaning 2 shots or boosted, or 2 shots or boosted. The 90% of the people who die in the United Kingdom are in those 2 categories. Okay, and the United Kingdom still has a lot of COVID deaths. It's not like I'm talking about 5 deaths a week. There are 1,000 people in the UK dying a week plus, and the UK is it's about 1/5 the size of the U.S. So there's a lot of death happening in a basically fully vaccinated population. Here's the math gets really complicated because Delta is different than the wild type, and Omicron is different than Delta, and there's this time element where you don't get, you get benefit for maybe a couple of months after the second shot, and then it goes away. Here's the takeaway: everybody who said this is going to stop the pandemic, they were wrong. They said it's going to reduce your risk of infection meaningfully. They were wrong. Now they're down to it reduces your risk of death and severe disease, maybe marginally when you look at the whole picture, not by 90%, not by 80%, not by any amount that it's going to stop a lot of people who are fully vaccinated from dying. That's the truth. And that's why this has to be a personal choice. If you're 80 years old, you're really scared of COVID, you're at higher risk from COVID, taking the vaccine and hoping for the best may still make sense for you. Okay, if you're 20 years old and you're at very low risk from COVID to begin with, and you have a risk of myocarditis, taking the vaccine makes no sense. It should not be mandated. College shouldn't make you do it. Your employer shouldn't make you do it. It should be your choice. Most of us aren't 20 and we're not 80. We're somewhere in the middle. It should be a personal decision for all of us. And, when we talk about going forward, that's maybe the most important, lesson of all. We need to talk honestly about what the vaccines did and didn't do, and we need to talk honestly about what the rules should be. And the rules should be nobody who doesn't want to take this has to take it.
Alex, when you look at the COVID zero attempts that were made in China, that were made in New Zealand, that were made in Australia, New Zealand and Australia have completely abandoned that idea. And as a result, their case rates are skyrocketing. Interestingly, China's still trying to do the COVID zero, and I think they just shut down Shanghai. But Hong Kong is having an outbreak that is really off the charts if you look at what is going on there. Yeah. What is going to happen in your mind when you look at what's occurring in places like Hong Kong? Is COVID zero still a viable strategy, even for a place like China, which is having draconian lockdowns and has been doing them for 2 years? Or is Omicron so incredibly infectious that it's impossible?
Yeah, great question. And, I think China's sort of the last domino to drop. And you're absolutely right. Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea. I mean, they weren't at COVID zero, but, they had sort of very effectively had low case rates. All of Asia now, aside from China, is having off the charts levels of COVID. And it's very hard to see. I mean, China's a densely populated country. How exactly are they going to continue to have no cases? And I think the answer is they're going to have cases. They may be scared because, they did have these sort of draconian lockdowns and they did pursue a COVID zero policy, but they're going to have Omicron in a population that has essentially no
That's exactly right.
natural immunity. And it's going to be crazy for a month or two. But they're going to have no choice. They're going to have to do that. That's what the rest of the world's experience suggests.
We're speaking to Alex Berenson. His Substack is certainly worth your subscription, friends, and Pandemia is his book. Alex, we just had to have you tee off on this one for a second. Clay and I have been going back and forth ever since they announced it. I mean, not only are they extending the mask mandate on planes, and Clay and I were both flying last week, and a lot of people listening to this have been flying in recent days. They extend the mask mandate on planes and in airports, of course. It's actually a mask up between bites policy. And Jen Psaki tries to defend this as though, but you're moving from a high transmission to a low transmission through a medium transmission. I mean, do people come to you more and more in the recent recent weeks and say, "Wow, you were right. The libs are insane." Like, what's going on?
I mean, it's not so much that; it's that they just want to forget the last 2 years, right? So my mother, okay, who's fully vaccinated and boosted, and for 2 years called Tony Fauci America's doctor unironically. She watches.
Hold on. I want to hear more about this, but what were the holidays like, given what you do and what your mom's perspective obviously was?
We didn't talk that much about COVID.
A lot of people can respect that, by the way. But I want to hear more about your mom and Dr. Fauci and what her perspective is now.
But she literally, so she hadn't traveled for 2 years. She'd been, although she wasn't personally, like I'm going to hide in my basement kind of freak like that. But she was cautious. So last month, and she was alone now. My father died. As I actually mentioned in pandemia, he died sort of early in the pandemic, although not of COVID. So it's been a lonely couple of years for her. So she got on a plane and went to London for 2 weeks, this 77-year-old woman, and just decided, you know what, I've had it, like the restrictions are off, I'm going somewhere. And she went there, and she came back about a week ago, and we were talking, and she said, oh yeah, COVID, but everybody seems to be done with it. It was just like, did the last 2 years not happen for you? Do you remember? And I think most of the country, most of the left, I would say, I'm guessing now, but let's say 60% of the left is like that, right? Like 100% of the right is done, and close to 100% of people in the middle are done. 60% of the left just wants to pretend it never happened, and certainly all the politicians want to pretend it never happened. But then there's this group of people, and I get emails about them. COVID just broke them. Right. So I got an email from a reader the other day saying, my dad has gotten 5 shots. He lives in a northeastern state and he drives to other states to get more shots, and he still won't go outside. And, it sounds like a joke, but this guy's broken, right? He's never going to get better. So there's a group of people who personally can't leave this behind, clearly. And then there's a group of people in the public health establishment, the ones I was sort of talking about at the beginning, who are almost regretful it wasn't worse, right? They were going to use this thing to remake society and, give us all universal basic income and nationalized health care. And they didn't get to do it because the pandemic wasn't bad enough. And they are plotting the next one. Okay, those are the people who are dangerous, and those are the people we have to be careful about. But the problem from the point of view of people on, my side or your side is we have to make sure the people in the middle who just want to forget about this don't forget, because there needs to be a reckoning. It needs to be a political reckoning, and there needs, to some extent, to be a criminal reckoning. Whether or not that's going to be possible, I don't know.
Amen.
Where do you think, by the way, Fauci is? Do you have like a tracker on him? Because he's vanished. Buck and I started making jokes about this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought at some point he would reemerge. But they really have totally killed him in terms of being able to talk to any media. It's wild.
So I issued a silver alert for Fauci last week. But no joke, because he's such a megalomaniac, they haven't been able to get him off the air entirely. So he's talking to I'm not joking, African American podcasters who have some audience that's I don't know whether it's in the thousands or the tens of thousands that you've never heard of. And so because he if he doesn't get interviewed, I think his oxygen supply dries up and he dies. So they're letting him speak, but they're letting him speak to places you've never heard of. That's what they're doing with Fauci right now.
Yep, he's hiding in the basement somewhere.
Maybe we should put another request in.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll come on with us now.
Get him on. That's right.
We'll try.
Oh, I'd pay to hear that.
Yeah,
me
us
too.
Yeah, Alex Berenson, everybody, check out Pandemia. Get a copy of Alex's book. Alex, we're going to keep on this, man. So we're going to be talking to you. Thanks for being with us.
We will forgive, but we will not forget.
100%. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, guys.
Amen. We are joined now by former Bush National Security Administration official Steve Yates. Appreciate him joining us right now to talk about the latest in Ukraine. Steve, I know it's been probably a crazy couple of weeks for you trying to keep tabs on everything that's going on, talking to everyone that you know. What would you say has surprised you? Couple-part question here to start with. What surprised you the most, and where do you think we are headed from here?
Well, thanks, Clay. I think what has surprised me the most is really what has been breaking in the last couple of days with this effort to tie some biological labs in Ukraine to a kind of an Iraq-style pitch to the UN by now Russia, probably backed by China, suggesting this was preemptive self-defense on the part of Russia. I have to admit, I did not see that kind of a thing coming when this broke out. And I think a close second to that is the resiliency of the Ukrainian people. I knew that there would be resistance, but I'm frankly impressed, largely being left alone by the international community, of them being able to grind this out against Russia. That, I think, has been a pleasant surprise.
Hey, Steve, it's Buck. There's obviously been a lot of back and forth last couple of days over the possible provision of MiG fighter planes of Polish origin through Germany via the U.S. to Ukraine. So essentially, they're handing us planes. They would get new planes from us as part of the initial pitch, and the older planes they have would go to the Ukrainians to fight. That has been scuttled for now by the Biden administration. How do you analyze and assess that? I mean, is it a provocation? Is it a good idea? Would it change much in this battle? What do you make of it?
Well, I think there's been some terrible fumbling by the Biden administration in terms of handling an ally like Poland in this. In general, I think it's a good principle to help others help themselves. I think that's what the United States should be doing with Europe without our being the front of it. It's what other Europeans should be doing for the Ukrainians right now. And so if the people of Poland want to provide material assistance, the United States shouldn't say no, and it shouldn't really be seen as a provocation any more than, say, Putin invading a neighboring sovereign country is. I don't think it was really that much of a status quo breaker, and I thought it was really, really awkward for Team Biden to kind of say you can't, or maybe you can, and then sort of pull it right back. It was just terrible all the way around.
Would the planes make a difference, though, Stephen?
I do think the planes would make a difference. I think the Ukrainians need all the material they can get at this point. Number one, to give them confidence to keep going with their resistance. Number two, maybe that would have the potential to change Putin's calculus. If he sees that Europe is serious about protecting Europe, then fundamentally that gets at what's at the heart of this, which is Russia's relationship with Europe and Europe's response to both the energy dependency and the security problem.
Steve, how long does this go on? Right? I mean, we have what appears to be almost a siege-like situation going on with Kyiv as they are slowly encircling the city to strangle it down, it seems, the Russians. Is this something that we're sitting right now in March, in April, May, and June, this is still going on? Or based on what you are seeing, is there going to be a resolution sooner than that?
Well, sadly, we're really in the seventh and eighth year of a war already, and so we're just catching one act of this drama at this point. This current version of it, I think, could break a number of different ways. Every once in a while, Vladimir Putin suggests he's looking for a way to kind of consolidate his gains and sort of sue for some semblance of peace. But Ukrainians need some kind of security guarantee that is not coming from NATO, is not coming from the United States. And so absent that, I think they keep grinding this out for a long time, which I think is very upsetting to a lot of people, rightly so, but I just don't see a way around that unless something really breaks.
Speaking of Steve Yates, former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, and also founder of the America First Policy Institute. Steve, the Putin goal here, is it strangle Kyiv, take half the country and make it part of the Russian Federation after negotiations with a beaten down Zelensky government, seize the whole country and then suppress any insurgency? What do you think Putin's endgame is?
My going in proposition was that he was just seeking to knock the legs out from under the current government and install a puppet, and would be happy having a friendly and reliable sphere of influence at his buffer. I think that calculus has changed by getting bloodied through this. And I think he's now trying to push for more maximalist options of actually controlling Ukraine, all of its territory outright. The only real question is whether enough of a deterrent can be put in place and whether sanctions actually bite, which I don't think they're strategically biting sufficiently yet to change his calculus to just accept where he has taken territory and call it a day.
Do you think, Steve, that Putin would be willing to use tactical nukes based on what we are seeing so far, or do you think the threat is more bark than it is bite? How do we analyze his perspective here, given that many of his decisions seem to have surprised the so-called experts so far?
Well, I think that's the real challenge in it, that everything has been a surprise to the intelligence set so far. And I think that there's no question that he is willing to do things. I mean, he's been willing to assassinate and poison foreign leaders. He's been willing to spread all kinds of noxious things in the system. And he has, of course, collaborating with the People's Republic of China, which unleashed a toxic virus out into the world for 2 years. So I don't think we can count on their sense of humanity or restraint. There's been talk of tactical nuclear weapons openly for a couple of weeks now. I'd like to believe that wouldn't happen, but I think we have to be very, very prepared for all outcomes at this point.
Stephen, what would you advise the Biden administration to do right now if you were back in the kind of role you were under the Bush administration?
Number one, first, do no harm. Let others who want to help the Ukrainians the way they choose go forward and do it. Number two, I think, find a way to press the Europeans to go much further, much faster on realigning their dependency relationships and in their defense capabilities, because America has big challenges in other parts of the world too. It cannot afford to carry Europe's weight when Europe can afford to carry it itself.
Outstanding stuff. Where do you see us? I guess last question. I know predicting is so incredibly difficult to do, but if you are, based on looking at all the data right now, trying to analyze it, where are we going from here over the next couple of weeks?
Well, with regard to Russia-Ukraine, I think we're pushing toward a moment of possible decision about, is a deal to be had, and are serious leaders going to come to the table and try to impose one that gives the Ukrainians some real sense of security and gets Moscow its guarantees that it seeks. That's an ugly deal, one no one really wants, but that might be the only way that this military conflict takes at least a pause. Otherwise, we're grinding ahead with what we have seen, and the people of Ukraine will continue to pay a dear price.
Stephen Yates, thank you for giving us the time and breaking down all the latest situation in Ukraine with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.